Can everybody hear me? Today I'm going to ask Senator Payne to lead us in a word of prayer. What number are you? Number 7.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we come to you today, Lord, and we thank you for all your many blessings. Lord, we just ask you to lead us and guide us in all the matters before us. Give us clear eye and mind of discernment that we serve your will in all things that we do. For us in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I want to welcome everybody here this evening for this late 5 o'clock committee meeting.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
We getting busy here. It's we done over halfway mark, and it's starting to be some long days. But today we have one bill, one hearing only on one bill, Senate Bill 494, and the author is here today, and it's the senator from the mountains, the Senator Steve Gooch. I'll turn it over to you, Senator.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman and committee members. I bring to you Senate Bill 494. The LC number should be 365071. It's a fairly short bill, as you can see. So just about a half a page of real context other than definitions. But before I get into the text of the bill, I want to just give you a little background on myself. Some of you may know this already and others may not, but 22 years ago I was elected as a sole county commissioner in Lumpkin County. So I spent 8 years in that office as county commissioner in Lumpkin County. When I first took office, we had literally no land use maps at all, no land use zoning, very few subdivision regulations were in place. So I've seen a community with no standards. I've seen a community that had literally no growth and no vision plans whatsoever in place. And we adopted what I consider to be common sense guidelines and land use ordinances over those 8 years that I was in office. Today, our community experiences a tremendous amount of growth, just like the rest of Georgia. We're seeing a lot of demands on our schools. We're seeing a lot of demands on our public safety services, a lot of demands for more water and sewer infrastructure, just like all of you do in your districts. But what we were careful to do in those years when I served as a county commissioner, especially when I was a sole county commissioner, and that was to protect people's rights to use their land. That is something that I've held near and dear to my heart my entire life, growing up as sixth generation Lumpkin County in North Georgia. We value property rights. And so I learned a lot in those 8 years, going to a lot of conferences, going to a lot of training courses through ACCG, the Carl Vinson Institute of Government, where I became a certified county commissioner. I went through all the advanced training. I have a master's degree in public administration. I've studied state and local governments formerly at North Georgia College. I have a master's degree from that university. And we put our community on a course to be able to handle growth. And I think you can do that with a common sense approach. But I've also seen other communities where they have overreacted in that management tool. You can use zoning ordinances I think to a degree to where it puts a lot of burdens and it ties people's hands on what they can or can't do to their land. And I think it's very dangerous when we get down to doing things that this bill addresses that we've seen in a small number of communities. There's not a lot in Georgia doing it yet, but I'm afraid that there's a trend coming that I believe we need to take a close look at with this bill to address some of these issues so we protect our future. A lot of people spend their entire fortune and their investment paying off their home. That's their nest egg. When they retire, a lot of people retire and they move into a smaller home. They like to downsize into another community or another part of the country. If they can't sell their house or choose not to sell their house, a lot of times they want to rent their home and move into a townhome or move out of the state and go somewhere else, or go to Florida and buy a condominium, what have you. But I think the people that buy the land, build the house on it, pay the taxes on it, they deserve to be able to use that property for what it's intended for. And if a community zones a piece of property residential or commercial or industrial, farm, whatever it might be, then I think those conditions should be applied equally to everyone, whether you own that house or whether you intend to rent it. This bill allows for cities and counties to continue to zone property. They'll continue to preserve their local control privileges that we give them in the Constitution and through state laws, but it does preempt them from banning the rentals of homes in subdivisions. Now, some of the communities in North Georgia, we're seeing a tremendous amount of growth. Cherokee County is one of them. You may hear other examples today. And they've adopted ordinances, and I have a copy of the ordinance from Cherokee County where they literally will require you to be in a special zoning classification in order to build a home that's going to be rented by a developer that's going to build those homes for that purpose. To me, I believe that's unconstitutional. I believe it takes away our property rights as citizens of the United States and as Georgia. So this bill would ban the ability of those cities and counties to zone out those properties to where you would literally ban and eliminate the ability to build a rental home. And so I'll be happy to go through the bill and talk, but we'll talk a little bit more about some things too. Over the last 15 or 20 years, we've been through some pretty serious economy shifts. We saw the huge crisis in 2008. The housing bubble busted. I think some of you may be familiar with that and may be impacted by that. Thousands and thousands of homes went into foreclosure. Hundreds of thousands of land lots were foreclosed on by banks. Banks failed. People came out and bought some of those lots for 20, 30 cents on the dollar from foreclosure sales, and they maintained those lots and they paid taxes on those lots for many years. Eventually, they were able to sell those lots to spec builders and other builders to build homes on them, some for permanent homes for people to live in, and some of those homes were investment properties. They were built to rent out for workforce housing and other things. So I think it's important that we maintain a good, healthy balance in our communities, whether that be multifamily, apartments, single family, attached, detached, small lots, large lots. It depends on the size of the community and the demands of the community. There's no one size fits all in Georgia when it comes to land planning, but I do believe preserving people's property rights is something that we should look at a statewide level, and that's why I don't believe that this is a preemption in a sense that it's taking away the local control of a city or county. So let's jump into the bill, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. The first page, lines 1 through, well, actually lines 14 through 28 are definitely just definitions. It defines what long-term rentals are. We're not talking about short-term rentals here. I know some of you have been confused about this. This does not apply to Airbnbs. It does not apply to someone trying to rent their house for a week or 2 weeks at a time. This would be for long-term rentals, which would be for 12 months or longer. It defines what the restrictions are on the permits. Lines 30 to the end of the bill is where basically where the meat of the bill is, and it pretty much just says that local governments shall not enact or enforce any restrictions on land or dwellings that are or are anticipated to be subject to a long-term residential rental agreement and are located on any property where residential dwellings are allowed. Such prohibition on the enactment or the enforcement of such restrictions shall also be applicable to any common area or amenity associated with such land or dwellings. Then it goes into the next paragraph saying that it shall be unlawful for any government entity to enact or enforce any restriction that would prevent a person from occupying a dwelling based solely on whether or not that person owns the dwelling. And then on the next page, it talks about the punishment and basically the enforcement side of what would happen if a local government violated this law, and it would waive their sovereign immunity to the extent necessary to effectuate this chapter. And then the next paragraph B goes into what's called the revoking of their qualified local government status, and I'll explain that in case you don't know what that means. A lot of cities and counties go to various state agencies for grants. They get state, federal grants. They go to EPD for a permit for a withdrawal for their water system or for their discharge for their wastewater. They go to the DOT for LMIG funds, that's your local maintenance improvement grants for your roads. In order to get those grants or those permits from all of these various state agencies, they have to maintain what's known as qualified local government status. The Department of Community Affairs enforces that. They are basically the gatekeeper of all the local governments to make sure that the cities and counties are following all of the state laws in order to get those state funds. So what this bill would do would be to revoke their QLG status until which time they would get back into compliance with this portion of the law. That's all the bill says. It's really an attempt to try to create parity across our state to allow for again, workforce housing, rental homes for people that may or may not want to buy a home. We don't believe everybody should rent a home. I don't think everyone is in a position to afford a home, especially young people that are just coming out of college or school. They want to have a family, they have children, they want to be in a small home, maybe a single family dwelling with a yard to play in, a tennis court or swimming pool in the community with some amenities. You don't always get that in an apartment. These communities that are being proposed to be built provide those amenities for people. It's a great, safe community for kids to run around in, and I believe that this is a great place for a starter family to get off to a great start. They rent there for a number of years. Maybe they're in there for 3 or 4 years, and then they are able to afford their first home. They're able to afford their down payment on a mortgage, whether it's 10 or 20 or 30 years. A lot of people will never get that opportunity. So these are good alternatives to an apartment complex. And I think if you look at the taxation side of it, there's a good argument to be made there as well. As you know, a lot of communities have rather healthy homestead exemptions for people who own their own home. So some communities may have a 50% homestead exemption. Some may have a 100% homestead exemption. What that means is if you own your home, you would literally pay up to 0 taxes on your school or your local governments. These homes that are built and rented get no tax breaks whatsoever. They get no exemptions from their local taxes. They get no state tax breaks. They're paying 100% of the load to the locals and to the state. So we believe it's a win-win for everybody. The companies that typically build these rental homes, they typically are run by either a property owners association or by their own property manager. They typically would do all of their own maintenance. They would take care of the roofs, the outdoors. Sometimes they cut the grass in all the homes. They take care of the amenities, so it's very well maintained and groomed subdivision. You would not know the difference if you drove through a for sale community versus a for rent community. Typically, you would never know the difference other than maybe the sign out front would read for sale or for rent. The danger in some of these ordinances that are being passed and being considered by the cities and counties in our country, not just in Georgia, would be that if they put a limit, which we're seeing some of the communities do, they're saying only 10% of a home in a subdivision would be eligible to be rented. Well, who's going to get that privilege? If there's 100 homes built in a subdivision in your community and only 10% of them are eligible to be rented, the first 10 people maybe that buy in would be eligible to rent their home, and after that, no one else would ever be able to rent their home again. Think about what kind of a position that would put yourself in if you were to move to another job, to another part of the state or the country, or if you lost your job. No one knows how long this economy is going to continue to thrive like it is. We're bound to repeat ourselves and have a recession. People are going to get in trouble financially. They're going to need to move, sometimes quickly. Having an option to rent your home to someone else to where you can get yourself back on solid ground is a good option. These kinds of ordinances will prohibit those people from having those choices, and I believe that is an overreach of government. I don't think it's fair to treat our citizens that way, and I would love to have your feedback on this bill and see how we could perfect it moving forward. Mr. Chairman, I'll stop and take questions.
All right. Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the sponsor of this legislation. It appears as if you're taking a sledgehammer to a project may only need a nail driver or something. Is this a problem statewide?
It's not a problem statewide yet. It could be. It could become a problem in suburban, urban areas. I don't see a rural area yet adopting these ordinances, but that's not to say they could not. I think what causes a lot of these ordinances like this to be adopted is a outcry from a community group of people. A lot of communities are against growth. A lot of high growth areas are worried about traffic, school overcrowding, and so forth. So they don't want any subdivisions approved more than what's there today. I've seen it in my district. In the southern portion of my district, it gets harder and harder to get properties rezoned, especially for higher densities. If you go to an R2 or an R3 classification, that allows for 3 to 5 or 6 homes to the acre versus an R1, which may be typically 1 home per acre or 2 homes per acre. So I think as you see developers trying to build high density subdivisions, you're getting more pushback. This is an alternative to that. This type of subdivision would have to follow the exact same building guidelines, whether that's no vinyl siding, whether that's brick and mortar only on the outside of the house. So there's no exceptions. These homes and these developments are not given any kind of special treatment. They're all treated the same regardless of whether they're built to be rented or built to be lived in by the homeowner.
Given that it's not a problem statewide, why wouldn't you consider dealing locally with your local charter?
Everything we do up here, we deal with issues that are statewide or that could be statewide.
No, we deal with local issues as well.
This is not a local issue. I understand what you're saying. You're just going back to the local control. And I think whenever a city or a county wants to decide which parcel of land should be industrial versus residential, I think that is a local consideration. But when a city or county takes away person's property rights, that's a guarantee we have in our foundational documents like the U.S. Constitution and our state constitution. Then it becomes a responsibility of us as state lawmakers to look over the backs of cities and counties and make sure that we're doing the right thing for our taxpayers. They're all the same constituents. You and I represent the same people that our mayors and county commissioners represent back home. You agree with that?
Senator, what I agree with is that you said it was not a statewide issue, and given your statements, then why are you considering statewide legislation for a problem that may be local?
We see issues down here all the time that are in certain areas of the state but not throughout the entire state. So to sit here and say that it's a problem in 159 counties, no, it's not today. 10 years from now, could it be in 50 counties or 80 counties? Very likely. We see that trend coming.
Just one follow-up. Have you considered what the repercussions would be to a municipality if its title was revoked?
Oh, that can be resolved quickly. First, you don't adopt the ordinance. That would be in violation of state law if you're talking about the QLG status. If you think that's the part where we use a sledgehammer, we can remove that and put some other softer language in there, or you can allow someone to go to court and file a lawsuit in civil court against the city. That's going to cost taxpayers money to defend. We would prefer the cities not adopt these kinds of ordinances. That's why we're bringing forth this legislation, so it would be illegal for them to do so. But if they were to violate the state law, then this would be the repercussions from that. And the consequences would be that for at least 6 months they would lose their QLG status, which at times, whenever they would get back in compliance with state law, they would be reinstated by the Department of Community Affairs.
And Senator, if I may, Mr. Chairman, isn't it true that DCA handles a lot of different programs and initiatives for municipalities and counties, and revoking that privilege could have a ripple effect and significantly impact that particular city's bond ratings?
I think anytime an elected official violates state law, there should be consequences for that. And if that's an elected official at the local level or at the state level or in Washington, then they should be held accountable. And this is one of the consequences of that. Now, you can strike this portion of the bill out, and you can add anything in there you want that would give the developer or the homeowner some recourse to try to get the city or the county to go and be in compliance with state law. This was the option that I chose because I know it's decisive in its due process. It allows the cities to come to the DCA and present their case and their facts, and let the Department of Community Affairs be the one to decide whether or not they're in violation of the ordinance or the law.
So you're open to having this bill reworked, is that correct?
I'm open to any suggestions that you have here today. I think that's the purpose for having the hearing, is to get feedback from this committee. And if we can work together to find a solution moving forward, I'm happy to work with you on that.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, members? Hearing none, we have some people signed up to speak on the bill. Charlotte.
I'm going to bring the city manager with me, if that's all right.
You can sit here.
Okay.
We're gonna hold all comments to 2 minutes.
All right. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. Charlotte Davis. I'm with the Georgia Municipal Association. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on Senate Bill 494, and we've shared our members' concerns with Senator Gooch, and I think he understands our perspective well. But we are hearing a lot of opposition from city officials across the state with the particular proposal. And so it's two fronts on the argument. The first, and we've heard repeatedly, that the justification for this bill is to protect private property rights, to protect an individual homeowner's ability to rent out their home to a long-term tenant. And if that were the only thing that were contemplated in 494, our organization would not have opposition, really for two reasons. We cannot find a single city that is currently prohibiting an individual homeowner from renting out their home to a long-term tenant. Cities are not trying to get into the business of that. Current law actually prohibits cities right now from keeping a rental registry, and there's no obligation from a homeowner if they do choose to turn their home over to a tenant for a rental purpose. There's no obligation for them to notify the local government of that case. So there's no way a city would even know or be able to regulate that. The real concerns, though, that we're hearing about this legislation is that this bill does preempt a local government and a city government from addressing newly developed corporate rental subdivisions, build-to-rent subdivisions, which is a new housing model. And it's not just prohibiting them from banning them altogether, it's prohibiting them from regulating them in any way, whether through a restriction or condition. And in the bill, it starts at line 21, in the copy you have. The definition of restriction is very broad. And it ranges anything from issuing permits, certificates of occupancy, all the way to a zoning or rezoning decision, which are core local government functions. And again, this is allowed really at the build-to-rent model, which is new, and we don't have, our organization does not have an opinion on whether or not rental subdivisions are good or bad. We just believe it's a decision best held locally. But to give you an example, cities are currently allowing these developments to happen all across the state. This is actually off of a company, American Homes for Rent. It's a developing group based out of California that's targeted Georgia as a hot market to develop these rental subdivisions, and cities are permitting these across the state. On their website, they've got examples of subdivisions going up in the city of Dallas, the city of Lilburn, Stockbridge, Loganville, Lawrenceville, Cumming. And these are nice houses, these are nice developments, but the difference is that they've worked with the local government to allow those to happen. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to conclude my comments there. I'll be happy to take any questions, and then I'll turn it over to City Manager Paul Radford.
Thank you. Next is Elizabeth.
Oh, sir, do you...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Paul Radford. I'm the city manager of the city of Sugar Hill. And I'm appreciative of the time to just talk to you a little bit about this. The addition of qualified local government status being removed for failure to approve a build-to-rent product, I think is unprecedented. And to combine that with a waiver of sovereign immunity is basically a potential hit on taxpayers that they're not expecting. this basically elevates a for rent product to a special protected class in our zoning regulations, and that concerns me deeply. Housing policy is one of the most personal issues that constituents interact with local government officials on a daily basis about. It affects their friends, it affects their neighbors, it affects their community. We know the rental market is on a huge increase on rental rates in this country. We're seeing that. CoreLogic just issued a report that we've seen the fastest year-over increase in 16 years, 3 times the 2020 rate. One of the reasons for is the supply-demand problem we have in existing single-family for sale product. But I can't ignore, I think, as city manager, the important and sustainable role that local government officials, the elected officials that are elected to serve their city, they must play a part in any dialogue about these for rent products. They must participate in the decision-making process, not just be a bystander with no interest in outcome. They're getting their hands tied with this particular bill. I'm not questioning the quality of the product. I'm not questioning the intent of the author or the intent of the investors, but we want high quality, something that's consistent with our plans. We adopt comprehensive plans, and if we implement them, we could be penalized because we're not approving a for rental product. We just approved a for rent product in our central business district, and we turned down one outside of our central business district because it's inconsistent with our plan.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And Chairman, Elizabeth Apley wasn't able to join us today, if you were going to
Elizabeth
call her.
wasn't?
Yes, sir,
Okay,
she wasn't able to join.
Okay. All right, we got a question from Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given that I represent Stockbridge, and I understand that the city has worked closely with the developer down there, and they insisted on certain things that be included in this development. Given that cities are developing these projects, obviously statewide, why do you think this legislation is needed?
I would probably defer to Senator Gooch on that as the bill sponsor, but I think he did touch on it that it's a new product, and cities have, when developers are coming to them, just like any new development, cities have set ordinances to have guidelines and policies, just like the city of Stockbridge. And so some of the restrictions or conditions that we're seeing are permitting the developer to come, but they have to have things like an on-site management company. And this is a different model. It's an out-of-state landlord, essentially, and a corporate landlord at that. It's not an individual who might reside in Stockbridge. So I think rightfully so, the councils have taken public hearings, public meetings, public votes to make sure that the standards are codified, that they're represented in the local ordinance. And I assume that's what the state legislation would be the reaction to.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Senator Gooch.
Could I ask you a question, Charlotte?
Yes, sir, of course.
So you said you didn't know of any counties or cities that were forbidding rentals. Are you familiar with, in your GMA, I understand,
Yeah.
Cherokee County adopted an ordinance February 15th of this year. And in that ordinance, they created these new zoning designations. They're called for rent dwellings, for rent communities, for sale dwellings, and for sale communities. And so
Right.
if you look at their land use map, which I have a copy of here, you probably can't see the colors, they only allow for rent communities in what they consider their multifamily residential zoning. That's the only zoning classification in their entire county they would allow for any of these these single-family rentals. So it would be in the multifamily designation. Well, if you're familiar with commercial real estate, you know that a multifamily land use on a zoning map is your most expensive land that you will have, because the highest and best use is for that high density for apartment complexes. Your lowest values are typically your ag districts or your S1s, R1s, or whatever they particularly call it. So your general, in Cherokee County's situation, the ag district, the for sale units are allowed. So you can build a subdivision if you're selling the home in their ag community zoning district. If you're trying to build a for rent community, they're prohibited. And it goes down through the estate residential designation, again, for sale units are allowed, but for rent districts are not. Those are for 2 acres, up to 5 acres for small little hobby farms or what have you. So if you go down through all of their different single-family residential zoning ordinances, they have about 5 different classifications, and every one of those single-family zoning classifications, they prohibit for rent communities. The only place they allow it is in the multifamily residential section. There's only 17 parcels of land that are currently zoned for multifamily in that community. And those are where your high-density apartment buildings, 5, 6, 7-story buildings. There's going to be 300 or 400 apartments in those complexes. Children have no yards. They have some back, probably some green space, but it's not the same as a for sale community. We believe that this is a good alternative for those people, the quality of life. So I'm not sure why the community wants to block them or to keep them out of their community. We think it's a good balanced approach for these workers in this community. So I would just ask you to take a look at that and understand where we're coming from.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the question, Senator Gooch, and you've certainly spent a lot longer in the zoning business than I have. But I did have an opportunity to review the Cherokee ordinance earlier this morning, and the one distinction that gave me comfort when I was reading it in the definition section, so you're right about the for sale, but there's also another distinction of the for sale communities, which does allow the partial rental. And I know that's actually one of the things you talked about, because it still is a cap on rental to no more than 10%. But in every one of these single-family residential zoning classes, 7.1-3, 7.1-4, 7.1-5, it's not only for sale, but it's the distinction and for sale communities. So rentals would be allowed in all 3 of those zoning classes.
For the 10%.
Right. Which any
So-
developer or homeowner would know going in, just like if you're living under an HOA covenant or like me living in a
Correct.
condominium.
Don't you agree that covenants and restrictions that are created by the homeowners associations are the best place for these kinds of land use restrictions and not being put on by the government of the city or the county or the state?
I don't disagree with that at all, and I think that's actually one of the reasons that our mayors and council members are concerned, because this is a different model where an HOA will not be present. There's not a homeowning association that will be able to implement any type of restriction or regulation.
So
And-
can I ask you a question about that? If
Yes,
there's not
sir,
an
you may.
HOA present, who's going to keep up with the 10%? Are your city council members going to keep a registry of who's renting that house? Because I can't tell when I drive down my neighborhood. I have 5 homes surround my home in Dahlonega. All 5 of those homes are currently for rent. They're being rented and they have tenants in them. Driving down Park Street in Dahlonega, I can't tell who owns or who rents. So how is the city going to be able to enforce that without a registry type program in place?
You're right, because we are prohibited under current law from setting any
And
type
that's
of
a
rental
state law,
registry.
not a local.
That's correct. The difference here, though, is these are new developments, so that would be placed as a condition upon a permit approval that a developer would have to comply with these types of rental restrictions and move the development forward. It's no different than any other type of zoning condition, and that's oftentimes where these types of discussions happen. It's between zoning and zoning planning boards, planning commissions that have that type of dialogue back and forth well before a permit's even issued, so that everyone is on the same page of what they have to adhere to when they actually start developing.
Thank you.
Senator Dixon.
Yeah, I just had a question for you, Mr. City Manager. Hope you're doing well.
My senator, thank you.
On your zoning designation, the business district, did y'all create that or amend your UDO to allow the bill for rent in that designated area, or was it?
It's mixed use by right,
Okay.
and it's a central business district overlay, so the underlying zoning doesn't necessarily matter. But we worked with this developer for almost 2.5 years to arrive at the right product for that site. It's an old industrial site within walking distance of our downtown, of our core. And so all 125 units on the site are a for rent product.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I hold my question for later.
Okay.
I should have asked
Thank you.
Senator Gooch anyway.
Thank you. All right, now we have the mayor of Augusta, Georgia,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
the man that works 51 weeks and plays 1 week. And he's fixing to play the first week in April, all week. Tell us about how many tickets you got for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and
Go
members
ahead,
of the committee.
Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely. In fact, it's actually 2 weeks we play.
And also a former senator from the great state of Georgia, too.
Thank you so much. I want to share the same sentiments that my colleagues who've preceded me in their comments have shared with you. I believe that both Charlotte and Paul have yielded the balance of their time, so I think I've got 7 minutes now. I'm just kidding.
You're pushing it now.
This issue that has been brought before us is a concern for all of us. I appreciate the author of this legislation for his willingness to engage us beyond today to try to perfect this, and it, I believe, requires more conversation. One of the hallmarks of local governments is the issue of home rule. What is being proposed today has a chilling effect of nullifying home rule. It not only has that chilling effect, but as City Manager Radford indicated, we go through on an annual basis the comprehensive plan process. It provides us with an opportunity, pursuant to working with the state agency that you promulgated authority to, DCA, of how we address these types of issues. And I believe that this conversation is better suited, again, in the local government to allow us to continue to enjoy that strong relationship. What we have today is, again, an issue of comprehensive planning that reflects the community's needs, our goals, and it also provides citizen input. With this proposed legislation, you effectively take that away from us. As Charlotte has already indicated, the restrictions are extremely onerous, particularly in terms of our ability to permit, our ability to license, because these are the things that we consistently do in providing for communities like this. The chairman indicated that we have this event every year in Augusta. We know how to rent. We do that very well. And our communities and our residents have enjoyed a long-standing benefit and tradition of being able to do that. Again, with this preemptive legislation, you're taking some of the controls that we have enjoyed of creating a community that thrives and grows away from us. I'll share these final comments, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, that I think are extremely essential to this. In line 41, the issue of sovereign immunity of all local governments and entities being waived, I believe raises a constitutional law issue for us. The state has the pleasure of waiving its sovereign immunity as it sees fit. To then come and say that it waives that of local governments, I believe causes a constitutional problem for us. We too enjoy the benefit of sovereign immunity, particularly in terms of lawsuit cases. And for us to have that removed from us causes significant problems, of which I believe the author of the legislation is very familiar with, having served in a local government role as well. The author of the legislation also acknowledges there are very few communities that have put in restrictions. I think this is better suited, perhaps as a local legislative issue, working with local governments, as opposed to this being statewide legislation that affects all of us. I'll close with the fact that 85% of our nation's GDP, to include here in the state of Georgia, happens in cities. We do not want to do anything that affects us and our ability to continue to thrive and grow. That is why we enjoy the benefit of being named the #1 state in the nation to do business for 8 years in a row. It's because of cities working with our state government to do what we're doing now.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll have Paul. Oh, you, okay, yeah. Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Todd Edwards with the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia, and with me I'll have our distinguished chairman for Columbia County introduce himself as well.
Sir, you know that's a stretch, but I'll take the compliment.
So I wanted to come up and let y'all know that ACCG is opposed to this legislation. I have a long cultural history working with Senator Gooch. He was a fine county commissioner, even a finer senator. I want to make it clear, like Charlotte did, that we have no opposition to single residents renting out their houses. We don't know of any counties that are doing this. In fact, it's almost impossible for us to track down who's renting out homes due to the state restrictions on property registries, et cetera. We also understand that Atlanta's metro rental market is white hot, one of the hottest in the country. It's leading to low supply and it's very high demand, and investors are getting in quickly on that action. In fact, at the third quarter of last year, nearly 43% of all homes in the metro area were acquired by investors, and these are renting out. That's good for the rental market. It may not be so good for those that wish to buy their homes for themselves. And these factors have led to an entirely new business model that we're experiencing. I've heard from 7 or 8 counties across the state where they've applied, and many have been granted these permits for these build-to-rent communities or rental communities. SB 494, as adequately described, would prohibit counties and cities from prohibiting these rental communities any differently or restricting them any differently than we do residential subdivisions. In limited time, I can't tell you the various reasons why local governments would do that, but they are charged with making these decisions for their communities. They're elected and accountable, and one of them, maybe they wish to reach a balance between rentals, apartments, the different zoning sections, and also homes that are available for sale within those communities. And in fact, if I had more time, I would go into the state comprehensive planning process, whereby local governments are required by law to balance the housing interest within their communities. I'll stop in short that we are not against rental communities. We're working to permit them. It is a new model. It's an increasing model, one we're seeing across the country. We look forward to working with neighborhood associations, international investors, planning commissions, et cetera, to regulate them responsibly moving forward, like we do most land uses in counties that have zoning. Again, not all of them do. Some of them will. Lumpkin may not. Gwinnett might. But again, we believe that decision should be left to local governments at the local level, and respect your I guess we would urge you to vote against this opinion and allow local governments to continue to do so. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Okay, now we have the chairman of commission from Columbia County, Mr. Doug Duncan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to speak before the committee today. First, I'd like to say that in Columbia County, we're very much private property rights supporters. We just believe that those decisions need to be made at the local level because we're closest to the people, we're closest to the community. We understand the housing needs of our community. Lately, we've had an influx of requests from, not requests necessarily, but outside corporations coming to propose building, I guess, this type of neighborhood, a corporate rental neighborhood. They don't live here, so they don't know our community. And those folks want to come in, and frankly, if they take that land off the rolls and make it a rental neighborhood, then at that point we've lost the ability to actually build more houses for our hardworking Americans. Because in Columbia County, we build an average of 1,000 houses a year, and we're a suburb of Augusta. And my good friend, the mayor, Hardy Davis from Augusta, he and I are like-minded on this, although we sit on opposite sides of the political fence. We think most of these decisions should be made at a local level so that the citizens that want to buy a home can buy a home, and the property won't be taken up by rental.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, now, Senator Gooch, would you have your closing
Thank you, sir.
remarks? You want to do it here, there, or?
I can just quickly here.
Okay,
All the speakers, we didn't have anyone else
Yeah.
signed up.
that's all I have.
I think there's been a lot said about local control, and there's been a lot of concern about sovereign immunity and the stick that we've applied in the measure about QLG status, and I'm open to talk with members of this committee about that. Turn me off.
Trying to get the static here.
If you can just talk loud.
Can y'all hear me?
Try another.
I'm not sure it's the mic, but it's just, can you all hear me in the back? So I'm happy to keep working with the members of this committee. If you have concerns that you would like to see addressed in the bill to get you to a level of support of the bill, I'd like to move forward with it as soon as possible. If you could reach out to me individually or as a committee, Mr. Chairman, you can communicate those thoughts back to us if you'd like. I think it's important that we continue to look at what's best for a community, but also as a whole, as a state as a whole. And this is an issue I believe is of importance to our state. You can look at big companies like Revoking, SK Batteries, Kia Motors, and other big economic development projects that are coming to Georgia. We've got to have places for these employees to live. And we're not talking about short-term rentals. We're not talking about 30 days or 10 days here and they're gone. And someone said they didn't know who their people were moving into their communities in these rental houses. I don't know who these people are that are moving into my communities that are buying these $500,000 houses either. They're coming from Atlanta and Florida and other places. But once they get there, they become part of the community. They raise their families there. They have children. They put them in our local schools. They work in our communities. They run for office. They get involved at the church. They get involved at the local chamber of commerce. They become citizens, just like whether you've been there like I have for 6 generations or you've been there for 6 months. You become a citizen of that community. I think it's important that we embrace those people that are moving in. I would much rather see these single-family homes being built in our communities than a high-density apartment complex. High-density apartment complexes have their place. There's definitely a need for them, but we should not try to cram 1,000 people into under one roof when you can spread them out, put them in a safe community, have a yard, have driveways, have parks and amenities, have a place to walk their children and their dogs, and have playgrounds. That's the kind of quality of life that I think that our citizens deserve, and they can afford it. They can pay the rent. They may not be able to pay a 30-year mortgage, but they may only want to be there for 3 or 4 years. If you go out and rent a house for 3 years, or you compare that to a mortgage, if you have a 30-year mortgage, the first 3 or 4 years of your mortgage, if you look at your amortization schedule, it's all interest. You don't pay down much principal at all. So you're not building equity when you buy a home and you only keep it for 3 or 4 years. You're basically paying the bank back for the cost of that funding. With all the closing costs, it could be $10,000 or $15,000 as well. I believe the rentals are a good option. It's a good alternative not only for moderate income people, but for higher income people as well. So I would really love to see us make this bill better, perfect it to where you would support it, ladies and gentlemen, and let's move it out of committee as soon as possible. Thank you.
Jay. We had one latecomer that wants to speak.
Thank you, Chairman.
State your name.
Yes, sir. My name's Jay Bice. I am a native Georgian for several generations and a co-founder of Revoking Homes, a home builder based here in Atlanta, who is doing some of the product that we are talking about here. My company, Revoking, along with my parent company, ResiCap, also based here in Atlanta, employ 300 people in the metro area and over 1,000, including vendors and subcontractors. So we did a hearing in the House about a similar bill a few weeks ago, and I just want to be very clear about what we see the intent of this bill being. This bill does not restrict municipalities from zoning land, structures, density, or uses. Rather, it ensures the municipalities don't overstep their zoning authority by implementing laws which separate people into classes based on whether they pay their monthly payment to a mortgage company or to a property management company. Rental housing makes up 35% of the market in this country and 35% of the market here in Georgia. So this is a big piece of the housing market that we're talking about. Municipalities are coming around saying that renters are different, that they cause different stress on local services, that they're less engaged in communities, or maybe in some way, quote unquote, substandard. In fact, one of the mayors that spoke last week said his city has had enough renters. He wants to change his constituents so that his city has more homeowners and less renters. Well, that city happens to be Sandy Springs, and I would think most other mayors around would actually love to have the economy and quality of life found in Sandy Springs. So why are all of these? Why all of this negative sentiment towards renters? So some municipalities say that a family who rents a home causes a different level of stress to community services compared to an owner. But that simply isn't true. Density, or how many families live in an area, cause different levels of stress on services. Municipalities control density in their communities through zoning. This bill does not affect that in any way. It simply clarifies that it's not a zoning power to dictate whether a person rents or owns that home. Previous legislators knew that discrimination against renters was a Pandora's box that would lead to division and angst among the people of Georgia. That is why municipalities are prohibited from keeping a rental registry per the Georgia Code. The municipalities are asking you to ignore that they are creating a different set of rules for owners and renters. They want you to say that the rental registry limitation was more focused on the registry and not the actual intent of making sure that renters are treated no different than owners.
Jay, you need to wrap it up.
Yes, sir. It's my last
I'll
point.
let you go over.
So, yep, sorry about that. This is a unique issue. It affects both property rights and ensures that people are treated equally whether they rent or own. And I ask that it should appeal to both sides of the aisle in a very bipartisan way. And I ask for your support of this bill. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you so much. Like I said at the beginning, this is just a hearing only. And I want to thank each and everybody for coming today. And we will be taking the bill up later on, possibly in the week, but I will be letting you know. At this time, we stand adjourned.